He told him something was coming. Joel Roth, head of trust and safety at Twitter, testified that he had had regular meetings with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and other folks regarding election security. During these weekly meetings, federal law enforcement agencies communicated that they expected a hack and leak operation. The expectations of a hack and leak operation were discussed throughout 2020, and he was told they would occur in a period shortly before the 2020 presidential election, likely in October. And finally, he said, I also learned in these meetings that there were rumors that a hack and leak operation would involve Hunter Biden. So, what did the government tell him? A hack and leak operation was coming. How often did the government tell him this? Repeatedly for a year. When did the government say it was going to happen? October of 2020. And who did the government say it would involve? Hunter Biden. Now think about it. Government had no evidence of any intrusions, no evidence of a hack and leak, yet for a year they tell Twitter that a hack and leak is coming, it's coming in October, and it will involve Hunter Biden. No evidence, but the FBI knows what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and who it's going to involve. Now that's amazing. That is amazing to me. Maybe they get the time right. We're kind of used to October surprises every 4 years. So maybe they get the time right, but they got the time, they got the method, and they got the person. That's amazing. It's almost like these guys were clairvoyant. How did they know? How did they know? Maybe it's because they had the laptop, and they had had it for a year. They had the laptop, they knew it wasn't hacked, but that's not what they told Twitter. They didn't tell Twitter that information, and Twitter believed, frankly, everything they said. In those weekly meetings, the FBI had built a cozy relationship with this tech company and others as well, we believe. Emails between the FBI and Twitter began with the greeting, hey, Twitter folks. Emails that asked Twitter to take down accounts and limit visibility of tweets. The FBI handed out security clearance to folks at Twitter. They communicated with Twitter on the secret teleporter app where messages disappear after a certain length of time. And of course, they paid Twitter $3.4 million. In addition, on August 6, 2020, the FBI briefed Senators Grassley and Johnson, and according to the senator's testimony last month in front of this committee, the briefing was bogus and done so someone could go leak that the briefing had happened and undermine the senator's investigation. In September of 2020, a government-funded think tank gets involved. They do a tabletop exercise. The participants include the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other mainstream media outlets. Facebook is there. Mr. Roth of Twitter is there. The organizer was the former CEO of NPR and the former head of news at Twitter. The mock exercise is hosted by the Aspen Institute. The Aspen Institute, which, by the way, in 2020, their budget was $9.3 million. $5 million from the State Department, $4 million from USAID, almost all their budget. Guess the title. Guess the title of this exercise. The Aspen Digital Hack and Dump Working Group. And guess who the subject was? Guess who the subject was? Hunter Biden. That's amazing. October 14, 2020, the New York Post runs the story on the Biden laptop and Twitter takes it down, even though it was accurate and even though it didn't violate Twitter's rules. Other social media companies do the same. Mainstream press works to downplay and discredit the story. Finally, as if on cue, 5 days later, on October 19th, 51 former Intel officials signed a letter with the now famous sentence, the Biden laptop story has all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. Something that was absolutely false. Our government built a cozy relationship with big tech. They primed him for a hack and leak operation. They funded the think tank, which further primed big tech and big media. They leaked information to undermine the good work of 2 United States senators, and then 50. So this is what's critical, and look, but to Mr. Cole's point, we're happy to work with the inspector. We like the inspector generals. Inspector General Horowitz, his reports on what the FISA court's been doing, those have been tremendous. So we want to work with them. We want to get information. But It would have been nice if they would have worked with us and we could have put something together. But no, couldn't do it that way. We're going to just pile it in one bill. We're going to bring it in front of the Rules Committee, take it to the floor, and pass it.
Yeah, and I think that's unfortunate as well, and it certainly negates any expertise that the representatives of one half of the country literally have sent to Washington to represent them. And that unfortunately is that we see that scenario played out over and over again. We're going to see it several times today in all of the appropriations work that remains to be done, the debt limit. Why we think it's necessary to cut out one half of the representatives of the people of this country. It doesn't seem like any way to run a railroad. I do have I have a lot more I could say about this, but in the interest of time, I do have 3 amendments that I want to just briefly mention because I will be asking for them to be included in the legislation that the Rules Committee puts out later today. The First Amendment, Amendment number 6, which strikes Title II, which extends the statute of limitations for federal offenses committed by a sitting president or vice president. As written, this bill provides 9 specific reasons that a president must choose to justify the removal of an inspector general. The president is the head of the executive branch and has the power to appoint certain inspectors general for executive branch agencies and departments. This amendment would remove these 9 reasons and instead require a written communication from the president or from the head of the federal agency that is removing an inspector general to the committees of jurisdiction in both the House and the Senate, explaining the substantive rationale, including a detailed and case-specific reason for the removal or suspension of an inspector general no later than 15 days before the change in status. Now, in June of 2020, the Supreme Court ruled in Celia Law versus Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that the restrictions on the removal of the CFPB director were unconstitutional, specifically violating the Constitution's separation of powers. So this amendment would remove this unconstitutional provision while still requiring transparency and accountability in the offices of the Inspector General. And this provision was included in H.R. 2662 that the House passed in June. And at that time, myself and Ranking Member Comer offered this same amendment, but it was not made in order. Perhaps this time it could receive consideration by the full House. And Ranking Member Comer, I assume that you still feel that this would be an important improvement to this process. The next amendment would strike Title II of the legislation. Title II of H.R. 5314 extends the statute of limitations for offenses allegedly committed by a sitting president or vice president for the duration of their tenure and any period of time preceding their tenure in office. While we can all agree with the title of this section, no president is above the law, this section sets elected officials apart. Under current law, elected officials may be investigated for alleged commission of crimes, and any information that can be brought before the Congress Congress can then choose to remove the official from the office via impeachment. If impeached and removed, that individual would then be open to full prosecution, the full extent of the law, well within the statute of limitations, just like every other American. Title II is unconstitutional as the Sixth Amendment Speedy Trial Clause protects the accused against unreasonable delays between an indictment and a trial. Extending the statute of limitations in Title II of this bill would only further politicize the presidency and vice presidency and make holders of those offices targets of politically motivated investigations after their terms end. And I would urge the committee to include this and allow the amendment to be debated on the floor and allow members of the House to vote their will on that. And finally, Amendment number 11 to 5314. This amendment would require any congressional subpoena to be approved by both the chair and the ranking member or a 2/3 majority of the committee or subcommittee issuing the subpoena. Congressional subpoenas are powerful fact-finding tools. They're used to compel either testimony or the production of certain documents. However, subpoenas have recently become politicized weapons with the majority party currently seeking contempt of Congress from anyone who doesn't immediately comply with a subpoena. And as I referenced last week, this invokes some of the worst excesses of the McCarthy era back in the 1950s, the House Un-American Activities Committee that created a blacklist of 10 individuals because they failed to comply with a subpoena. These measures are purely punitive and would not produce the information sought by the subpoena. This politicization reduces the effectiveness of subpoenas.
Frightening, and so that's something if we get the majority, we need to look at, and a host of other issues, the border situation, as I mentioned. We need to look at how did thousands of Americans' tax returns get public? That's not supposed to happen in this great country. So all those things need to be investigated just so you have the truth. Plus, that will help frame up the 2024 race when I hope and I think President Trump is going to run again, and we need to make sure that he wins.
Okay, so it's not unprecedented, but it's nearly unprecedented that the Department of Justice is working hand in glove with this J6 illegitimate committee on the House, and they're going after people like Steve Bannon, who's here on the grounds of CPAC, and others for not following these subpoenas, right? When you get, which is just a travesty, but when you have that gavel, and you're the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the House of Representatives, and you guys vote on a subpoena, doesn't that put Merrick Garland in a little bit of a box? He's basically saying, if you ignore a congressional subpoena, I will go after you through the Department of Justice. You really think he's going to be consistent and do the same thing for you?
Well, there's been a double standard for a long time, it seems to me. Before I get into that, let me just say one thing. There is an election in 12 days in the state of Wyoming, and there is a good person, Harriet Hagman, running for office. If you all haven't helped her, I mean, we want to make sure that she wins that race.
By the way, CPAC has endorsed Harriet. We have sent checks to Harriet through our PAC, and boy, having another person who pushed for impeachment against Donald Trump go down would be sweet.
Yeah, To this committee, though, I think the key point is we've caught this committee lying 8 different times. I mean, they lied about Bernie Kerrick's travels. They lied about Barry Loudermilk, a colleague of mine, giving a tour of the Capitol. They lied about Jenna Ellis's documents. They lied about Eric Hirschman writing the note. They lied about the Secret Service. We caught him lying about Pat Cipollone and corroborating the story about if they went to the White House, they'd be charged. He said he didn't say that. And then they lied about me twice. I forwarded a text message to the White House Chief of Staff, and they said that it came from me when I forwarded from a lawyer in town who was former Inspector General for Don Rumsfeld. And then they played a video clip of me. I was doing an interview, and they played a video clip. In the video clip, I said January 6th is the ultimate date of significance in a presidential contest because it's the last step. You got the election, then the Electoral College meets, and their certification, and then the last step is Congress certifying the electors. And they left out an important part of that clip because before I said January 6th is the most important date in a presidential contest. Before I said the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said January 6th is the ultimate date of significance. That sort of changes the context. So think about this. If we've caught him in 8 false statements without any access to the documents, without any ability to do the deposition, be in the deposition, see the transcripts, look at the evidence, if we've caught him in that many lies with that limited knowledge, imagine how many other false things they're telling the country. That is what is so wrong. There's a great scripture verse. Polly and I found this the other day. Proverbs 18:17, it says, the first to present his case seems right until another questions him. And it's like, that's the principle of cross-examination that we always have in any type of proceeding, any type of hearing that unfortunately is not present with this January 6th committee.
The Bible also talks about bearing false witness, which is awfully important because if you have no truth, what do you have in government, right? And so back to this question of what do? You say there's an election in Wyoming. We still have to have a big red wave in November, but how are you thinking through this awesome responsibility you have? I think the investigations piece is the biggest piece. It's what you immediately jump to it. We have always had a philosophy under the previous 2 Republican speakers of you know, we should be careful. We don't want to do too much. We'll take baby steps. We'll do one thing at a time. And I remember people like John Dingell and Henry Waxman just flooding all their political opponents with a constant barrage of letters and inquiries. What is going to be Jim Jordan's approach?
We're going to, like I said, we're going to do it in the right way, in a way that's consistent with the Constitution. But you got to be aggressive if you're going to get to the truth. Back up a second. Think about what they did, what the Justice Department did to moms and dads. So I always tell it this way. On September 29th, the National School Board Association, left-wing political group, writes a letter to the Biden White House saying, use the Patriot Act against parents. 5 days later, October 4th, the Attorney General of the United States issues a memorandum which does exactly what the left-wing political organization asked him to do 5 days prior. He issues that memorandum, says set up a dedicated line of threat communication, a snitch line, basically for reporting on parents who show up at school board meetings to advocate for the well-being of their child. 16 days after that, October 20th, the FBI sends out an email to agents all across the country, and that email says, use this threat tag designation, this EDU official, this designation, this threat tag, use that when you're investigating parents who've been reported on the snitch line that the memorandum was set up by the Attorney General. So think about it. September 29th, October 4th is the memorandum to U.S. attorneys, October 20th is the email to FBI agents. All that happens in 22 days.